I first met Jaleesa Trapp more than 20 years ago when she was just 13 years old. She'd come to Boston from her hometown of Tacoma, Washington, to participate in the Teen Summit, a gathering of teens from computer clubhouse after-school learning centers from around the world. By creating technology-based projects at her local clubhouse, Jaleesa had developed an impressive range of technical skills. But even more important, she developed a new sense of herself as a learner and as a creator, and she saw that she could accomplish much more than she'd ever imagined. Over the years, Jaleesa developed a deep commitment to expanding opportunities for young people who, like herself, come from marginalized communities. After graduating college, Jaleesa worked as a computer science teacher at a high school in Tacoma, and she also served as the coordinator at the same computer clubhouse where she'd had such influential experiences just a few years earlier. For the past decade, Jaleesa has worked as a graduate student and now a postdoc in our lifelong kindergarten group here at the MIT Media Lab, and she's focused on developing technologies and community-oriented activities to engage and nurture a new generation of young people at computer clubhouses around the world. I've always been inspired by the way that Jaleesa, in all of her work, is always looking for ways to help young people build on their interests and their lived experiences. Too often, young people from marginalized communities are viewed in terms of their deficiencies instead of their strengths. In our podcast conversation, Jaleesa describes how she has helped young people uncover what she calls hidden pathways. That is, leveraging the knowledge and skills they already possess in order to develop new expertise and create new opportunities for themselves and their communities. If we hope to support all young people from all backgrounds to reach their full potential and thrive in today's world, I think we have a lot to learn from Jaleesa. Hi, Jaleesa. Welcome to the Lifelong Kindergarten podcast.
Thanks.
So, over the years, I've seen you work on so many different projects and initiatives, and I've learned a lot from the ways that you think about equity and inequity in learning and education. And I've also learned from the type of actions you take for dealing with those issues. Maybe to kick off the conversation, I'd like to ask you to talk about a question that I've sometimes heard you ask, and that's who gets to play? So when you ask that question, can you tell me more about what you mean?
Yes. So I asked the question, who gets to play, because of my own experience growing up. In lifelong kindergarten, we talk about creative learning. We talk about learning while doing and tinkering and playing. But in my own learning experience, I wasn't allowed to play. I always talk about how my mom would tell me, I did not send you up to that school to play. And it was for my own good, because playing meant I would get in trouble. I wasn't allowed to use the computer unless I was typing up an essay. Even my younger sister, I can recall numerous amounts of times she was sent home to take a break from school. It's not documented as a suspension, but they definitely sent her home. And so in my experience, I wasn't allowed to play, but it's a big thing in education. And so I asked the question, who gets to play? Because often for young people like me, well, not like me, young people who look like me, playing means it's a behavioral issue.
But why do you think playing is so important? Why was it important for you to get the opportunity?
Yeah, playing was so important for me. So going to the clubhouse, I started going to the clubhouse when I was in the 7th grade, and it just opened up a whole new world for me. I was able to play. I was able to play with my friends. That's another thing my mom would tell me is, you don't need to help those other kids, because like me talking in class would result in me getting in trouble. And I was just trying to help my peers. Like we were talking about the work that we were doing, and I wasn't allowed to do that. But at the clubhouse, I could play. We could create all types of projects that we were interested in. And, that led me to a lot of other things, like interning at Microsoft and going to college.
But maybe say a little more about what you really mean by play, because it's not just, some people hear play and they might think, acting silly or frivolous or just laughing all the time. But when you say play, what type of things were you looking for that were important to you?
And we definitely acted silly sometimes. But so the first code that I was able, well, the first piece of code that I wrote was in a language called Lingo. And I created an interactive CD-ROM, and like that makes me so old. I created an interactive CD-ROM, and it was based on a play that I had seen and even been in before, called "What If There Were No Black People?" And in this play, it highlights the inventions of Black people in the United States. And I got to work on it with my friend, Jomia. And so she designed all the characters. And so I got really into it. And because of that, I created more interactive CD-ROMs. I explored other ways of coding. I made websites. But I got to play around with things in a way that I would never in school.
But doing something serious by playing. The playing lets you learn serious things.
Exactly. So yeah, at school I would get an assignment sheet and say, do this, and I would have to follow it step by step. But with these projects, I was able to play around with things and explore and tinker in a way that I hadn't been able to before.
Maybe jumping ahead many years, you then later on, you were a coordinator at that clubhouse later, but you also were a high school computer science teacher, where there are very specific needs of things that have to be covered in the curriculum. How did you think about the idea of integrating, providing opportunities for play, but also meeting the real needs of what the young people need to be learning in the classroom?
So my first year of teaching, I was kind of nervous to do that. I wanted to make my classroom more like a clubhouse. And in order to do that, I really needed to listen to what the students wanted to do, what was important to them, and then also just introduce them to an environment that they weren't necessarily used to in school. The first year I taught computer science, we were supposed to create, they were supposed to create a mobile app. And instead of using the prompt, I knew that one of the issues that they were concerned about was how to tell where their class was. So I taught inside a Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. That's where the school was located, and sometimes we would get kicked out of buildings. And so several students made an app called Class Finder, where you could update where their class was. But that was important to them at that time, instead of giving them the prescribed curriculum. And as time went on, I found better ways of using students' interest to complement what I had to do as a teacher.
Yeah. Well, I did basically helping to build on their interests as a pathway towards learning the important things that you knew were going to be important for them to be learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think any other things, the fact that you were working in both of these two settings, both the informal learning setting of the clubhouse and then the formal classroom setting in a school, how did you sort of compare those two? Or how were you able to take the lessons from one into the other?
Yeah. Being at the clubhouse really helped me shape what I wanted the classroom to look like. In particular, there's this one time I had a young person at the clubhouse. Her name is Jade. And she was in a computer science class at a different high school, not at the one that I was teaching. And she came after school one day and said that she was failing her computer science class. And I was confused because that was her specialty. She would come in and she would teach all the other kids how to do Scratch. She would do web design. She had even gone to Microsoft for girls who code. And she was really, really good at it. And so I couldn't understand why she was failing the class. Come to find out, the assignments that she was getting were extremely boring. And they were telling her step by step what to do. And she was like, well, this doesn't make sense because I would do it this way. And so then we started a game called Let's Do Jade's Homework. So all of the kids would ask her, like, what assignment do you have today? And they would all put their own spin on it and work on those projects to encourage her to actually do those assignments and get those turned in, because we all knew that she was really good at it. And so, it really made me think about the type of assignments that I was introducing in the classroom. Are these assignments that students don't want to do, but they very well could do? And really just thinking about like the motivation and how to make sure that all of the students in my class had an opportunity to learn how to code and learn how to code in a way that worked for them.
that was personally meaningful to them. I know another thing I've heard you talk about is it's partly building on their interests and what's meaningful to them, but also I know you've talked about how you can build on the certain skills and knowledge they already have that oftentimes are ignored in a lot of educational settings. How is it that you were able to help build on the existing and leverage the skills and knowledge and creativity that the kids already did have from their lived experience?
By listening. So when I was a clubhouse member, my coordinator, Miss LaVersa, she used to encourage us to try things all the time, even if we thought we weren't interested. And it was funny because, once I became an adult, I realized, she was listening to things that we were interested in. And she would tell us to try things because of things that we were interested in. And we had no idea that there was even a connection. So, for example, there was a kid who just loved to dance, and that's all. Like, he wanted to come in and he wanted to record himself dancing. He wanted to go in the music studio and make new music to dance to. And so when I introduced Scratch to him, the first project that we ended up making was a dancing video. And it was a popular dance at the time that all kids were like recording themselves and putting online. So he was able to recreate the dance in Scratch. And then he was able to screen record that and post that. And then all the other kids were like, oh, wow, how did you make that? But dancing was how I got him to work on a Scratch project.
And if they were teaching Scratch in his school, he probably wouldn't have had the chance to build in his dancing expertise.
No, not at all.
Or if he did try to, it might have been seen as him goofing off and he might be disciplined for doing it as opposed to encouraged to do it.
And he was often disciplined for dancing at school. So.
I know I've heard you use the phrase about trying to build on those skills and expertise that kids have is about uncovering the hidden pathways that they can take. I know it's based on that movie, Hidden Figures. Maybe you can explain a little bit where the motivation for that came from.
Yeah, so I co-taught a class with one of my colleagues, and we were trying to come up with a name for the class. And we were just thinking about all of the students that we have and all of the talent that they have and all of the expertise that they come with. And it made me think of Hidden Figures. And about the human computers and the Black women that were the force behind NASA and how that history has been covered up or had been covered up until that point. And how...
And thus they'd been hidden figures.
Yeah, they had been hidden. And all of this time, there's been these efforts to get more Black women into these fields when in reality, Black women could already do this. And so that's why we named the class that. But then... during my master's thesis, what I did was I looked at all of the work that I had been doing in the classroom and in workshops and thought about all of the skills that young people brought. So one of the workshops was, what is it called? One of the workshops was a poetry and paper circuits workshop. And normally, I don't think people would think like poetry and paper circuits go together. But poetry was a way to get a lot of the young people into learning about paper circuits. And then they were able to create these amazing designs and visual representations of the poetry that they came up with and collaborate with their peers in a way that other teachers wouldn't have been able to uncover that they had this talent or had the skills or had the interest to create these paper circuits if it wasn't for poetry. That's just not in the curriculum to think of, let's do this poem to teach paper circuits.
Yeah. So they were building on their lived experience, but to then learn things that could be important in their future directions, whether it's for further education or careers or other meaningful hobbies that they're going to be doing.
Yeah, and that's a part of it too, is naming those future pathways that they can take. And so that's part of the uncovering hidden pathways, is connecting their interest and lived experience to possible pathways that they may not have known existed.
And in helping young people build on their lived experience, if I draw someone on you building on your lived experience for the pathway that you were able to navigate for yourself, maybe how did we be able to use your own experience as an example and trying to create those possibilities for others?
Yeah, well, when I was in the 7th grade, before I started going to the clubhouse, I thought I wanted to do hair for a living. That's where I felt the most creative, was braiding hair. But because I was introduced to other ways of being creative at the clubhouse, I learned that I was interested in UX. And so when I was 16, I applied for an internship at Microsoft, and I was on the mobile and embedded devices user experience team for a summer. And I was just like, oh, whoa, like there's a field for this. I didn't even know that field existed, but I knew I wanted to help people, and I know I wanted to use technology to do that. And I like to design things. I like to research. And so it was the perfect internship for me. And I would have never known that if I didn't have the opportunity to explore at the clubhouse. And so, after that, I actually majored in human-centered design and engineering at the University of Washington. And again, I would have never known that that even existed if it wasn't for me being able to explore.
Yeah, and I remember you said at first you thought about maybe checking out computer science at university, but the way it was taught did not align with the things you were interested in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I did actually start out as computer science. I didn't even realize that this internship that I had done was a field that I could do in college. I thought that I had to do computer science and then maybe I can do usability testing. And so when I started taking the computer science classes, it was very much you go to lecture, you listen, you watch the instructor do things on his computer that's on the projector. You go to your section, and in your section you have things on paper, but then you have homework that you turn in digitally every week.
Yeah. So it was a great learning experience for you to learn what you didn't want to do and to learn how you didn't want to run classes when you then became an educator.
Exactly. It's like we literally took tests on paper, and I was like, how am I supposed to compile this and see if it works? I couldn't tinker by writing it on paper. I was supposed to memorize things and get it perfect, and that's not the way that I learned how to code. I learned through working on projects.
Yeah. But it's also a credit to the university that they had broken out a separate field, human-centered design and engineering, which was a good match for you. And I mean, oftentimes structures of educational organizations don't provide the pathways that are going to be a good fit. So it was fortunate you were at a university that had a good fit for you. Yeah. I know, in addition to trying to support young people in finding their pathway for their own life of, their own future education, career, and other activities they're doing. There's also how to support them in using their experience to help support their communities and to be agents of change in their community. I know that's something else that you've also tried to do in the way of supporting young people, not just following the things that they're going to learn, but how to support their communities. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so for my dissertation, I worked with the Clubhouse Network on creating the Youth Activism and Advocacy Program. And that was something that was really important to me. And actually, it didn't even start out as being a part of my dissertation. You're the one who said, this could be your dissertation.
Well, I do think that's a big role that I play as an advisor, is just looking at graduate students and saying, you seem really interested in this. That should be what you focus on, which is exactly what you did with your students. So I was just doing the same thing.
But, I mean, it started out as me just wanting to work on designing this program because the Clubhouse Network has a rich history of young people being involved in creating positive change in their communities and being involved in social justice initiatives. And so the Clubhouse is the perfect place for that because they have access to tools and technologies that they can use to amplify campaigns. And so I worked with the Clubhouse Network to design this program, and we worked with 10 sites around the world to implement it.
Maybe you can tell some examples of what went on at those different sites.
Yeah, so one of my favorites, I shouldn't say I have favorites, but I do. One of my favorite projects that came from this was in Panama. And in Panama, the young people there were concerned about recycling. And when I first heard that, I was just like, okay, we're all concerned about recycling, but then I learned more context about their community. So it's what they call a commuter city it's within the Panama City limits, but what happens is people drive through early in the morning to get to work, and they drive through late at night to go back home, and they just dump things, all kind of things, trash, old technology. They just dump things everywhere out the window. And as you're driving, you can see this. Like, I actually had the opportunity to visit, and you can see all of the trash that's dumped. And so it started out with them thinking about how they can encourage people in their own community to recycle, because the government wasn't coming in to help them. And it started out with 3 or 4 young people that were investigating the root causes of this pollution. And when I got to visit, there were over 50 young people.
Wow.
It turned into an environmental justice movement. As they were doing research on the root causes, they were learning more things, and they were learning about environmental impacts, and they were learning more about what they could do. So it started out with them wanting to create a mobile app to show people where and how they can recycle things. And they did create that, but they created so many other projects. One of the projects that I really liked was melting down plastic bottles that they would find at the park and turning that into filament for a 3D printer. And so they held an environmental justice fair in the park. They hired youth performers. They hired like food trucks, things like that. And they just put on this big fair in the park where people from the community could come and learn about what they were doing and what they can do to help.
I think one thing that I really like about this is they were finding something that was really meaningful in their community. So it was really based on their experience in their community. So it's not that the 10 sites you work with, they're all doing similar projects, but they each found something that was meaningful in their community. Like maybe what's another example of a different type of community-based project that they worked on at a different clubhouse?
So at another clubhouse in Pittsburgh, the young people there, it started out with them being concerned about a lot of things in their community, including gun violence. And it was hard for them to narrow down what it is that they wanted to focus on, because as they were investigating the root causes, they learned that so many things were interconnected. And what they ended up focusing on was food insecurity. And as they were investigating food insecurity, they learned that an alum from their clubhouse actually had a community garden. And so they actually started going to work in this community garden and building a website and mobile app to let people in the community know when and how they can access food for free, and also how they can volunteer. And it was interesting because there was actually another clubhouse in Los Angeles that was also addressing food insecurity. But for them, what they did was they designed a toolkit that they distributed to LA County Public Schools that was for food pantries for young people. So they addressed it in really different ways, but it was something that they deeply cared about and that they all had experience with, and whether it was them themselves or people that they had seen in their community.
I also like the fact there are a lot of educational settings where young people are sort of forced to learn a particular set of things, and then they're able to work on a project. Here it feels they're really learning things through working on a project, and they don't work on a project as a reward for having learned the things, but they learn through working on a project.
Yeah, they learned a lot of how to use different tools because they, like in Panama, those young people, they didn't know how to create a mobile app before that project. And so they were like, this is what we want to do. So we actually have to learn how to code and how to create this mobile app.
To really motivated to learn at that point because it was part of a meaningful project.
Yeah.
I know in talking about these projects, I know you've sometimes used the framing of creativity and justice. And for me, that really caught my attention because obviously in our group, we've talked about creative learning for years and really value the importance of young people engaged in creative learning experiences. But obviously, creativity can be used in lots of different directions. You could use creativity to do certain things that we don't feel very good about. So maybe say more about how you see this intertwining between creativity and justice in order to support the type of activities and experiences that you want to support.
Yeah, so creativity and justice, again, comes from my own personal experience doing community organizing work in Tacoma. in order to get things done, it took a lot of creativity. It takes a lot of creativity. And it takes creativity to imagine things that have not happened yet. And so, like, one of the things that I think about is when people were enslaved, they had to imagine a world where they weren't. That's not something that they ever knew, but they imagined it. And you have to be creative to think of things that have never existed before. And so I know that young people with these lived experiences can imagine a world. And I want to be able to give them the tools to get closer to that world that they imagine.
Yeah. And by drawing on their lived experience, they're better able than anyone else to be able to reimagine their community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, from these different experiences, if you had to sort of, and I know you're always thinking about new initiatives and new projects to work on, if you were to start a new community center or a new school, what would you say is the most important sort of core principles that you would try to build upon to be able to achieve the things that you'd like to achieve?
I don't think I would invent anything new. I would take the Clubhouse Network principles. And the only thing I would add is making sure that young people are able to see how their pathways, how they can see what pathways are possible. And I say that in particular with the Clubhouse principles.
And with the Clubhouse principles, just to, I know the Clubhouse principles, it's about supporting young people work on design projects based on their interests as part of a community interacting with others in an environment of respect and trust.
Yeah.
So all of those are important. But in addition to that.
Yeah. So in addition to that, is making sure that they know what pathways are available to them. And I say that because the Clubhouse was a place for me and my peers to go and play and to explore and to just figure out what it is that we were interested in. And we had the tools and the adult mentor support to do that. There's not a lot of places like that. And if we're being honest, a lot of communities where clubhouses are, there may not be a solid pathway to go to next. I mean, I'm thinking in particular about the youth activism program when I was working with the young people in Palestine. Their project was around youth apathy. A lot of young people felt like there was no future for them, or there wasn't anything that they could do once they graduated from high school. And so this space isn't to say like, after you finish here, you will have a certificate and you can go do this specific job. It's not about like workforce development or training people to do very specific tasks, but to give them an opportunity to be creative thinkers and to think about things that they can do in the future with what they already have. Thinking again about Panama, a lot of the young people there are undocumented, but now a lot of them have skills to be entrepreneurs. So one young person in particular, he does a lot of work, a lot of community work with the skills that he learned from the Clubhouse, and he's able to make a living for himself, even though he doesn't have documentation and can't get a job like at a corporate place.
So it's like building the confidence that they know that they can build upon their skills and knowledge and experiences in order to find new pathways for themselves or for the community, or how to reimagine their own future or reimagine the community.
Exactly. So I think I would just add like having examples of where the projects that they work on, how those can expand to other things.
Yeah. If you had to give advice to educators who work in many different types of settings, from your experience, what are the most important advice that you would give to educators in general to support learning education, but in particularly to deal with a lot of the inequities that we do see in educational systems?
So the advice that I would give to educators is to really lean into the things that young people are interested in, even if it's just them talking. If you notice that you have a student that's just chatty all the time, lean into that, figure out what they're talking about. How can you turn that into a project? Like when I was teaching, I ended up doing a whole project about creating how-to because all of my students were interested in how-to tutorials, and they were always telling each other like, oh, I can teach you how to do this. And so we made these scratch projects on how-to, and they got to teach what they knew how to do.
So it's great. So it's building on their interests, but also making connections across and learning from other people's interests. Yeah. Any final advice you'd want to share with people?
Yeah, so my final words of advice is to consider the lived experiences young people as expertise, and also consider play as something that's really important for their development and for their futures, and not even just for their futures, but for our futures, and to think beyond the things that you currently know, and just know that young people have the passion, they have the expertise and tools to create a new beautiful world if we allow them to.
Thanks so much, Jaleesa. The Lifelong Kindergarten podcast is produced by Mitchell Resnick and Eric Schelling in the Lifelong Kindergarten Research Group at the MIT Media Lab. You can find other episodes, additional resources, and online conversation in our Substack at bit.ly/LLK podcast.